Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtiprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 5, Narad concludes his teachings to Vasudeva. Text number 17 onwards. Et atma hano ashanta agyane jnanamanina sidantiya kritkrityavai kaladvasta manoratha. The killers of the soul are never peaceful because they consider that human intelligence is ultimately meant for expanding material life. Thus, neglecting their real spiritual duties, they're always in distress. They're filled with great hopes and dreams, but unfortunately, these are always destroyed by the inevitable march of time. And this is what the situation today, these days, as people are. They don't know about the soul, and all they are filled with great hopes and dreams and making plans, always making plans for the future. But ultimately, everything is taken away by time and frustration. Only the frustration will happen. There is a similar verse in Shri Ishopnishad. The killer of the soul, whoever he may be, must enter into the planets known as the worlds of the faithless, full of darkness and ignorance. So there is no light, there is no happiness for the killer of the soul. Means those who do not want to advance spiritually. Hitvatma maya rachita grihapatya surit striyaha tamo vishanti anechanto vasudeva parang mukha. Those who have turned away from the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, being under the spell of the Lord's illusory energy, are eventually give up their so-called homes, children, friends, wives, and lovers, which are all created by the illusory potency of the Supreme Lord, and enter against their will into the darkest regions of the universe. The living entity turns his back on the Supreme Personality of God and tries instead to enjoy temporary sense gratification. The result is simply anxiety as the conditioned soul struggles to maintain his temporary wife, children, friends, home, nation, etc. Finally, all of these things are taken away, and the bewildered soul, in great frustration, sometimes tries to take shelter of an impersonal concept of God and liberation. So why an impersonal concept? Because they think that if I have a body, means I again have to go through all these struggles and the frustrations and so on and so forth. So the reason for this is because I have a body. So if there is no body, that's it. No more issues, no more problems, no more sufferings. So then they take shelter of impersonal concept because it sounds so good. But no, they don't understand. There is a spiritual body in the spiritual world that we get, which is full of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. There is no lamentation in the spiritual world. But to come to that position, it takes time. Thus, the conditioned soul is always in ignorance, either pursuing illusory sense gratification or trying to avoid sense gratification by merging into the impersonal aspect of the Lord called Brahman. But the actual position of the living entity is to serve the Supreme Person who is his master. And unless one gives up one's inimical feelings towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no question of peace or happiness. So not just give up one's inimical feelings, one has to come to the platform of service of Krishna. Then one can attain real peace or happiness. Shri Rajuvacha, Kasmin Kale sa Bhagwan, Kim Varna Kidrishon Rivi, Namna vakena vidhina pujyate tad ihochatam. So further King Nimi is saying, King Nimi inquired, in what colors and forms does the Supreme Personality of Godhead appear in each of the different ages, and with what names and by what types of regulative principles is the Lord worshipped in human society? It has been clearly established in the previous verses that human life is spoiled if one does not surrender unto the Supreme Lord and engage in his loving devotional service. Therefore, the king is now requesting the sages to give specific details about the worship of the Lord, because this devotional process has clearly been described as the only practical means of delivering the conditioned soul. So there is no other way. Atmana, Atmahanta, and going in the impersonal way, that's not the solution. The solution is the devotion service. Shri Karbhajan Vacha. Now next, Navyogendra, next of the Navyogendra is speaking, Karbhajan. Kritam Treta Dvaparam Cha Kalir Iti Eshu Keshavaha Nana Varna Vidhakaro Nane Vidinejyate. Shri Karbhajan replied, in each of the 4 yugas or ages, Krita, Treta, Dwapar, and Kali Yuga, Lord Keshava appears with various complexions, names, and forms, and is thus worshipped by various processes. Krite Shuklash Chaturbahur, Jatilo Valkalambaraha, Krishna Jino Pavitakshan, Bibrad Danda Kamandalu. In Satya Yoga, the Lord is white and four-armed. Satya Yoga or Krita Yoga also it is called. The Lord is white and four-armed, has matted locks, and wears a garment of tree bark. He carries a black deer skin, a sacred thread, prayer beads, and the rod and water pot of a brahmachari. Because in Satya Yoga, the process of self-realization is meditation. So this is what how he appears, and this is what he preaches or establishes the Dharma. Manusyastu tada shanta nirvaira suhrida sama yajanti tapasa devam shamencha damencha. People in Satyuga are peaceful, non-envious, friendly to every creature, and steady in all situations. They worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead by austere meditation and by internal and external sense control. In Satyuga, the Supreme Lord incarnates as a four-armed brahmachari described in the previous verse and personally introduces the process of meditation. Because dharma, he has to establish a dharma in every yuga, besides other pastimes. But this is one of the major pastimes. He appears as Yugavatar and he establishes dharma. Dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Hansa suparno vekuntho dharmo yogeshwaro amala ishvara purusho vyakta paramatmeti giyate. In Satyuga, the Lord is glorified by the names Hansa, Suparna, Vaikuntha, Dharma, Yogeshwar, Amal, Ishvara, Purusha, Avyakta, and Paramatma. The sage Karbhajan Muni is replying to Videhraj Nimi's questions about the varieties of the Lord's incarnations. In Satyuga, the Lord's color is white and he wears tree bark and a black deer skin as an ideal meditative brahmachari. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur has explained the Lord's various names in Satyuga as follows. Those who are self-realized know this supreme reality of the personality of Godhead as Paramatma. Those souls who are situated in the religious system of Varnashram glorify him as the Hansa, who is transcendental to all the Varnas and Ashrams. Persons absorbed in gross matter consider him to be Suparna, the beautifully winged basis of the conceptions of cause and effect, who flies within the subtle sky of the soul as described in Chandogya Upanishad. Persons accustomed to wandering within this universe of subtle and gross matter created by the Lord's illusory potency chant his name, Vaikuntha, Persons deprived of the power of transcendental meditation, dharan, were thus subject to falling from the path of religion, glorify him as dharma, or religion personified. Those who are forced to submit to the illusory modes of material nature and whose minds are uncontrolled and disturbed glorify him as the most perfectly self-controlled Yogeshwar. Persons tainted by a mixture of the modes of passion and ignorance call him Amal, or the uncontaminated. Persons devoid of potency call him Ishwar. Ishwar means full of all the potencies. He is a controller. And those who consider themselves to be under his shelter chant his glories by the name Uttam Purusha. Those who know that this material manifestation is only temporary call him Avyakta. In this way, in Satyuga, Lord Vasudeva appears in various four-armed transcendental forms, and the Jiva souls worship him, each by their own particular process of devotion service. Therefore, the Supreme Lord has many different names. So here it is a shloka in Satyuga, the Lord is glorified by the names, so many different names. So the point is, although the process in Satyuga is meditation, the process of self-realization, but chanting of the holy names is always the supreme. Without chanting, see here also Lord is glorified by different names. Without chanting, one cannot even meditate properly. So this chanting of the actual process is chanting of the holy name. The real strength comes from that. There could be different ways. Now meditation, Treta Yoga, they do big yagyas. Now even in yagyas, they had to chant the holy names. And then Dwapar Yoga is temple, elaborate deity worship in the temples. And deity worship cannot happen without chanting of the holy names. And Kali Yuga is only chanting of the holy names. So actual process is chanting of the holy names. But and also in Satyuga, the Maha Mantra that was given at that time was Om Namo Naranaya. Oh no, sorry. Om Namo Vasudevaya, which Prahlad Maharaj chanted. So the real potency is in the holy names, nothing else. Tretayam Rakta Varnavasu Chatur Bahu Ristri Mekhala Hiranya Kesha Sayatma Sruka Sru Vadyu Lakshana. In Treta Yuga, the Lord appears with a red complexion. He has 4 arms, golden hair, and wears a triple belt representing initiation into each of the 3 Vedas, embodying the knowledge of worship by sacrificial performance, which is contained in the Rig, Sam, and Yajur Vedas. His symbols are the ladle, spoon, and other implements of sacrifice, because he has to establish the process of yajna, sacrifice. The shruk is a particular implement for pouring ghee in sacrifices. It is about an arm's length long and is made of a particular type of wood called vikankata. The shruk has a rod-like handle and a spout with a shallow groove at the tip that resembles a swan's beak. Its front part is a carved-out spoon the size of a fist. The shruva is another implement used in sacrificial oblations. It is made of khadir wood, is smaller than shruk, and is used to pour ghee into the shruk. Okay. It is also sometimes used instead of the shruk to pour ghee directly into the sacrificial fire. These are the Lord's symbols in Treta Yuga, when the Lord incarnates to introduce the Yuga Dharma of Yajna or sacrifice. Now this sacrifice, that is very, very technical, how to perform this Yajna. chanting of the mantras, use of different kind of implements or equipments to perform the yajna, how the fire, ghee is poured in the fire. It's not just with any spoon. So much of details are there. Tam tada manuja devam sarva devamayam hare yajanti vidyaya atraya dharmishta brahmavadina. In Treta Yoga, those members of human society who are fixed in religiosity and are sincerely interested in achieving the absolute truth worship Lord Hari, who contains within himself all the demigods. The Lord is worshipped by the rituals of sacrifice taught in the three Vedas. The residents of the earth in Satyuga are described as having all good qualities. In Treta Yoga, human society is described as dharmishta, or thoroughly religious, and Brahma Vadina, or faithfully seeking the absolute truth through the Vedic injunctions. However, it should be noted that all of the exalted qualities of the people of Satyuga are not mentioned in this verse. In other words, in Satyuga, people are automatically perfect, whereas in Treta Yuga, people are inclined to become perfect through performing Vedic sacrifice. That they're not perfect, but they can because they're inclined to become perfect. In Treta Yuga, human society is not automatically Krishna conscious as it was in Satyuga. But people are still highly inclined to become Krishna conscious, and thus they strictly follow the Vedic injunctions. So they're very highly inclined. Vishnu Yagya Prishni Garbha Sarva Dev Urukrama Vrisha Kapira Jaya Tascha Urugaye Tiryate. In Treta Yoga, the Lord is glorified by the names Vishnu, Yagya, Prishni Garbha, Sarva Deva, Urukrama, Vrishakapi, Jayant, and Urugaya. Prishni Garbha refers to Krishna's incarnation as the son of Prishni Devi and Prajapati Sutapa. Vrishakapi indicates that if the living entities simply remember the Lord, he is inclined to shower all benedictions upon them, thus satisfying their desires and removing their miseries. Since the Lord is always victorious, he is called Jayant. So again, different names to be chanted in the in Treta Yuga. Now comes Dwapara Yuga. Dwapare Bhagavan Shyama Pitavasa Nija Yudha Shrivatsadi Bhirang Kashcha Lakshanar Upalakshita. In Dwapara Yuga, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears with a dark blue complexion, wearing yellow garments. The Lord's transcendental body is marked in this incarnation with Srivatsa and other distinctive ornaments, and he manifests his personal weapons. The Lord's transcendental body in Dwapara Yuga can be compared to the color of a dark blue flower. The Lord exhibits his personal transcendental weapons such as Sudarshan Chakra and all of the limbs of his body, especially his hands and feet, are decorated with auspicious symbols such as a lotus flower and a flag. And on his chest, the Lord manifests a kaustubh jewel as well as the auspicious Srivatsa, a whirl of hair curling from left to right on the right side of the Lord's chest. So much of detail is there about Srivatsa. Actually, such auspicious marks as kaustubh and Srivatsa, as well as the weapons of the Lord, are present in all of the Vishnu Tattva incarnations. Srila Jiva Goswami explains that these universal characteristics of the Lord mentioned by the sage Karbhajan are indications of Krishna avatars. Because Krishna is the source of all incarnations, all of the symptoms of all other incarnations are to be found in his transcendental body. But there is one particular thing, if you notice, in Satyuga, Treta Yuga, even in Kali Yuga, the Yuga avatar appears in the beginning of the Yuga. to establish the Yuga Dharma. But Krishna, he is the Supreme Lord himself. So what does he do? He comes towards the end of Dwapar Yuga. Because when he came, and after Mahabharat war was over, and when he left, Kali Yuga started. So he came towards the end of Dwapar Yuga. But still, he is a Yuga avatar and he established Yuga Dharma, which was supposed to be done from the beginning of Dwapar Yuga. So although he appears towards the end of Dwapar Yuga, still he establishes Yuga Dharma from the beginning of Dwapar Yuga. Only he can do all these things. Tam tada purusham martya maharajopalakshanam yajanti veda tantrabhyam param jigyasavo nrika. My dear king, in Dwapar Yuga, men who desire to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the supreme enjoyer, worship him in the mood of honoring a great king, following the prescriptions of both the Vedas and Tantras. When Lord Krishna was leaving the city of Hastinapur, Arjun personally held an umbrella over the Lord, and Uddhav and Satyaki fanned the Lord with decorated fans. In this way, Emperor Yudhishthira and his followers worshipped Krishna as the greatest of noble kings and as the supreme personality of Godhead. Similarly, at the Rajasuya sacrifice, all of the great souls of the universe elected Krishna as the king of all kings, the greatest personality, deserving the first worship. Such reverential worship of the Lord is characteristic of Dwapar Yuga, as described in this verse, Maharajopalakshanam. See, with lords of opulence he is worshipped. With each successive yuga, namely Satya, Treta, Dwapar, and Kali, the condition of the human society deteriorates more and more. As mentioned in this verse, the only favorable qualification of the people who lived during Dwapar Yuga is that they are jigyasava, strongly desirous of knowing the absolute truth. So in Satyuga, they were all qualified. Treta Yuga, they had the inclination. Now they only jigyasava, strongly desirous. Kali Yuga, forget about anything else, everything. Otherwise, there is no good qualification mentioned. The people of Satyuga were described as Shanta, Nirvaira, Sukrita, and Sama, or peaceful, free from envy, the well-wishers of every living entity, and were fixed on the spiritual platform beyond the modes of material nature. Similarly, the people of Treta Yuga were described as Dharmishta and Brahmavadi, thoroughly religious and expert followers of the Vedic injunctions. In the present verse, the people of Dwapar Yuga are said to be simply jigyasava, desiring to know the absolute truth. Desiring to know the absolute truth. Otherwise, they're described as martaya, or subject to weakness of mortal beings. If the human society of even Dwapar Yuga was clearly inferior to that of Satya and Treta Yugas, we can hardly imagine the truly disastrous condition of human society in Kali Yuga. Therefore, as will be mentioned in the following verses, human beings who have taken birth in the present age of Kali should attach themselves rigidly to the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to free themselves from all sorts of foolishness. So I guess we'll stop here because a wonderful shloka is coming up, 32nd verse. So we'll take that up. We'll stop here and take it up tomorrow. See, anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.